I'm glad we're like an intimate group, so we can maybe communicate while this is happening. Thank you, Mariano, for inviting me, and thank you, Barbara, who's doing the translation for those of you who are listening to the Spanish. It's wonderful to be here, and I just thought I'd share with you, since this is an art museum, 3 performances that I did during this kind of weird period of time in my life. And then, well, yeah, I'm just gonna kind of share with you these things, and hopefully we can talk. Just out of curiosity, who in the audience can understand English? Okay, great, basically almost all of you, so that's good. I would love to kind of talk with you at the end, but meanwhile, while I'm speaking, feel free, because we're a small enough group and I can see you. If you have a question or something I say doesn't make sense, or you just have a comment or anything like that, just signal, and I would love to talk with you. Okay? I guess just to start, does anybody recognize this symbol? No. It's the international symbol for pawn shops. So in Spanish, I think it's empeño. It's a store where when you're poor, you bring something to sell, and they buy it at a really shitty, low rate. Like you could bring your TV, or your bicycle, or your wedding ring, and you know, that kind of thing where, like, if you can't pay the rent or you need food or something like that, and then they resell it at a high price, normally too high for you to buy it back. Do you have something like that here? You guys? Okay. Well, I like this symbol because for me, the pawn shop actually originated in Italy in the early Renaissance. And this symbol, you'll find it across the world at pawn shops. And for me, it's basically the symbol of bad math, just like a shitty economic structure. That I'm a bad exchange rate, a falsely imposed system of value that I'm very familiar with just by living. And there's something about it too that I found like inspirational. So I created this like flag for a period in my life that was kind of a period of theological experimentation, or experimental theology, and sort of playing on the French Oulipo movement. Okay, somebody's like radio is on, that's cool. So in France in the 60s, you guys might know about this group of writers who called themselves the Oulipo, and the Oulipo continues to today. And it was a group of writers who were approaching literature from the point of view of games, and also with an interest in mathematics, but in general a kind of experimental approach to the structures of literature. And I just thought that I would do this with theology. And in some weird way, the pawn symbol made sense to me because I felt like I was living in a cultural situation where the treasures of the religions had become valueless. You can now read any sacred text that you want on the internet, and you don't have to be initiated into some weird mystery school or trained by monks or otherwise prepared to encounter the flower of various cultures. So the most precious, most valuable elements of the world religions have been made public, which I find really exhilarating. But at the same time, things that have tremendous value have no economic value, and somehow moving through those texts, I ended up finding myself continually invited to create performances. And I don't really know why that is. Maybe it's because art institutions suddenly realized that poetry existed. I'm a poet. I guess, I don't know if Mariano said that. Did he? Did you? Okay. So, sorry. Let me see what I can do. So, poetry is really cheap. It's like, and there was just this period that art institutions all over the world were asking me to do performances all the time, and I think they thought it would be really cheap that I'd come and talk, and it would be very inexpensive and unusual. And so what I'd like to do is to share with you 3 performances that come from this period of what I was secretly imagining constituted experimental theology. Is that cool? Any questions so far? Okay, great. So this is lost communication with the home base. Do you want to just press the arrows or something? Oh. Okay, cool. Well, so in 2012, I was getting these weird emails. I get a lot of weird email because I guess, I don't know if, I think it probably has something to do with being a woman, and it might have something to do with the content of my work, but I get weird emails. And if I was more, yeah, I mean, probably everybody gets weird emails these days. Probably everybody in this room. I was getting these weird emails from a guy who seemed like a bot. Like, do you understand what I mean? He seemed like his emails were so much like spam that they almost were, but he was a human being. But like there were a lot of hyperlinks in the email, and it was a little bit of a word salad. Just like almost like a kind of Dadaist, like cascade of words. But there would be images also, and I was getting emails from him for like 6 months, and then I got this one email, and the subject line was Rabbi Reines. My last name is Reines. And it kind of like jolted me, and I was like, Rabbi Reines? That has a nice ring to it. And I did some Googling, and this is Rabbi Reines. And he was a rabbi, and he ran a yeshiva. He ran a school in Belarus in the late 19th century that was unique among yeshivas. It was the first, I don't know if it was the first, but it was one of the first religious schools for Jewish boys that taught subjects other than religious subjects. He taught mathematics, he taught history, and this was considered extremely radical and visionary at the time. He was also a Zionist, but to his credit, he was very, very clear he came out very clearly against the idea of taking any land in what was then Palestine by violent means. He said that if the Jewish people were to take that Holy Land by war, by bloodshed, And if they shed the blood of the Ishmaelites, which is what he called the Arabs, the Palestinians, that it would be a blight on the Jewish soul for all eternity. And I liked that. It excited me because I don't get along with my father, and I just thought that the idea of having somebody possibly in my family who was both progressive and visionary and also very much ahead of his time in the ways that he thought about what war and violence and bloodshed, not only due to the other, but due to the perpetuator, the perpetrator. I thought, this is my grandfather. And so me and my dad don't talk, but I wrote him an email, and I was like, it was like such a nice email, and it was like, dear Dad, like, Rabbi Reines, like, blah, 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 like everything I just told you. And I feel like he kind of looks like me, like around the eyes, and like maybe we're related. And I just had this huge renewed hope that my father and I could get along, and that maybe there was a good man in my family, and maybe there was a future for the Jewish religion, for spirituality, for my family, anything, for masculinity in general. And my dad said that we are related to Rabbi Reines, so I basically decided that I wasn't related to my dad. But what was cool about this moment of receiving this spam email from this weird person that I'd never met is it opened this idea. I'd never connected rabbi and like my family before. And it sort of gave me permission to start playing with this stuff. So the first performance that I was invited to give was at a gallery in London. And the gallery is run by a gay man, big surprise. And the show at the gallery was early drawings by Tom of Finland. Do you guys know Tom of Finland? No? Yes. Do you want to say, for the people who don't know Tom of Finland, can you say what it is?
Es un ilustrador que empezó a ilustrar el mundo gay desde un lado muy erótico y muy... Empezó sobre todo en la cultura sadomasoquista. Empezó a hacer dibujos que tenían muchos tintes sadomasoquistas, donde se marcaba mucho la pija, donde había mucho sexo, sobre todo los antros europeos. Como que empezó a reflejar eso a través de dibujos, también hizo Santa Claus porno gay, y motociclistas, cuero, todo ese mundo como masculino, lo súper mariconeó y es súper famoso.
Sí.
Googleenlo.
Muchas gracias. Yeah, so I was like, so Tom of Finland, it's like mega masculine, it's like joyous sadomasochism, huge cocks, huge muscles, no women. There's no women in Tom of Finland. In that universe, no woman exists. And I was like, why? Why is a gay gallerist inviting a woman to make a performance in this space? Like, he could do so well if he just like got like a muscular man to like cover himself in grease and like gyrate. He would sell all the work and it would be fine. But I appreciated the perversity of the invitation. So I should say right now that throughout the talk there will be vaginas, penises, and a spider. Okay? So you've been warned. So I thought, I'm going to impregnate the impregnable. You know what I mean? And so I called the performance The Origin of the World. And I took this text from that I'd read online in the sort of repository of sacred texts. That was my favorite book to read, still is. A 4th century Gnostic text called On the Origin of the World. And that particular text comes from this collection, a kind of an anthology, if you will, of texts that was found in a jar in Egypt in 1945. It was published in the United States as the Nag Hammadi Library. Has anybody heard of it? No. I've noticed that the only people who are into this are like metalheads. Those are the only people I've ever seen who have it like at home, like in their bedroom, or seem to know about it. And I'm like metal adjacent. Anyway, it's a really interesting book because everything that was in this jar, all these papyri, it's full of the ideas that Western culture would repress for the 2,000 years of Christianity as we have known it. So there are bad translations of Plato in the jar, and there are these unusual theological texts, including maybe the most famous one is the Gospel of Thomas. Maybe some of you have heard of that? No. It's this really interesting collection of sayings of Jesus where he says things that are a lot weirder than you find in the canonical Bible. And one of the texts is this didactic text that describes the origin of the world. And it has a lot in common with Genesis. There's Adam and Eve, there are angels, there's God, but the whole situation is very, very different. The angels are extremely jealous and threatened by the human beings. They're terrified that humans will realize their divine origin and thus become greater than the angels. So one of the things that they do to prevent human beings from surpassing the angels is they all gang rape Eve. And they gang rape her to sort of mix their seed in so that it's not clear who the parent of her children will be. And they also do it to shame and confuse her into a state of pure materialism, I guess, or a fallen state. There's all this really interesting stuff about the structure of the universe in this text. It basically says, so it's from 4th century Greece, so there's some ideas from Plato. I just want to check in. Are we okay? Am I like being boring and didactic? It's a lecture, so. Okay, so there's these, there are these, it's this really interesting amalgamation, this text, of like, sort of Neoplatonic or Platonic ideas and elements of Egyptian, Jewish, and kind of Proto-Arab Gnosticism. But this understanding of the structure of the universe is very Greek. So they say that there's a totality, the pleroma, and the totality is gendered masculine. And out of this totality emanates the second degree of the divine, which is called Sophia. You might have come in contact with this idea, that the feminine principle of the divine emanates from the totality. So the feminine principle is the second degree of infinity, if you will. And it's through Sophia that the creator of this world emerged. And the story is really funny. I love it. I mean, do any of you like listen to Black Sabbath? Yeah? No. I mean, it's classic now. Come on. All right. Basically, Sophia emanates from the totality, and then she accidentally emanates this guy. And it's like she sneezed or something, and this being emerged from her. And when she saw that she'd accidentally created a being, she said to him, "Child, go over there." And she wrapped him in clouds. So she hid him, she just like wrapped him up. And because the only sound that he had ever heard was the sound of his mother saying, "Go over there," he understood that to be his name. So in this text, the name is Yaldabaoth, and there's like a lot of like Norwegian black metal and heavy metal songs that refer to him because he is the demiurge, the creator, sometimes known as Yahweh or God or whatever, the Father, who ends up creating this plane of existence. So he's there wrapped in the cloud. He doesn't know that that sound that he heard was his mother. He doesn't know that he has a mother or a father. He thinks he's the only being in the universe. And in his ignorance, he creates us. He creates Earth and Adam and Eve. And so because we were created in ignorance, and because our parents didn't know that he wasn't the only God in the universe, all kinds of shadows came into creation with us. Jealousy, envy, covetousness, lust, all the rest of it. That's what this didactic text, everything that I'm saying to you, it all comes out of this text. So I thought I would take this origin story and try to connect it to the fear or the anxiety that I think is in us around our origins, at least in me. I can't speak for anybody else, but I think there's something fascinating about the contingency of existence. And it has to do, for me, with the problem of the feminine and the difficulty accepting the power of it. It's terrifying, in a way, to think that our lives are so contingent and that we don't really know what they come from, what we come from. I mean, the ape thing, that's like a nice story. If you're into that kind of thing. But what I loved about this Gnostic telling is I found it very human. I found there was something quite productive in thinking about the creator of this plane having not realized that he was not the originator of the universe. That he too had emanated from something, that the immensity of his existence was also contingent, you know? So I took that text and I combined it with this great painting by Courbet, L'Origine du Monde, which I love. And I thought that in order to express the kind of anxiety around contingency, I would use a bug. And I was very arachnophobic. So what I did was I got a tarantula to be with me while this Gnostic text was, a recording that I made of the text was read. And so the performance was basically like story time in kindergarten. Did you guys have a story read to you in kindergarten? Or do you have kindergarten in Argentina? There's a lot of Nazis here, right? No. Well, we used to have story hour, and it was like a very erotic experience because it was after lunch, and the light was dim, and there was this one boy in my class who would always take his clothes off during the story, and like the teacher then would like spank him, which I think would probably be illegal now. But so this story was being read, and I was confronting this terror of spiders, but it was a slow confrontation. The story took about an hour, and what happened around halfway through was my boyfriend at the time just like took his clothes off. He's like over there on the left, and he didn't clear that with me. Let me see if that might be a little bit idiomatic, might be hard to translate. He did not get my permission to do that, but it was weird because he sort of like unconsciously was mirroring the guy in my kindergarten who would take off his clothes during the story, and he. Sorry, I keep going the wrong direction. He like joined the performance. And what was really interesting about this is the terror, to me, like the fear of bugs is really interesting. I don't know, do you guys like bugs? Does anybody in the room really like bugs? No. I hated them too, and I thought about it a lot because it's like, do I hate them because they are ugly to me, or does it have to do with the fact that you think there's nothing there and then there's something there, or is it the fact that they move really quickly and it's unpredictable? And I think for me, what this performance taught me about fear, I guess, or repression, and anxiety, the sense that you think you're in a space that you understand the parameters of, and then when there's a bug there, like a cockroach or something, suddenly it's not your space. There's something uncanny about it, and it's sudden. And it's like the bottom falls out of reality really quickly, and you want to get rid of it. You want to get rid of it. And for me, that was connected somehow to this anxiety around the feminine. And because a tarantula is poisonous, do you have them here? This tarantula is Chilean. She actually, the performance happened in London, but she has been in Harry Potter, and she's like a professional. But she's not, the idea of an unpoisonous spider doesn't exist, apparently. And that's her trainer in the corner, and he's like a zoologist who specializes in venomous and poisonous animals. And he told me that if she is not moving, it means that she's happy. So the secret to this performance was that I had to move really, really slowly in order to not get bitten, basically. And I felt like there was somehow this connection between anxiety over origins, terror, and speed was like opened up in this confrontation for me. Does that make sense? Anyway, any questions so far? So this was a pretty, I would say it was like an hour performance. I really liked the idea of not using my own language because women are always expected to explain themselves, like I'm explaining myself right now. Whereas I noticed that in the visual arts, there's like a real dignity to the male gesture. And you just kind of make a gesture and then let people deal with it, you know? And we like that. That's cool. Anyway, so the next piece that I did was a collaboration. It wasn't exactly the next, but the next one that I'm going to talk to you about was a sculpture collaboration with a friend of mine whose work is very butch. He's a sculptor. And it actually came out of this joke from a line from my second book. There's like a character in my second book who's writing a memoir, and he's calling his memoir Mein Kampf, like Mein Kampf. Anyway, so me and my sculptor friend was like, I want to make Mein Kampf with you. Like, we should make that. And I was like, well, if we do that, then what we should make together are herms. And this is a herm. Has anybody seen things like this? You guys familiar with these? So these are, this is sort of from the archaic period, but they existed, there were Roman copies of these as well. A herm is basically, it's like this pillar with a head and a genital. It's usually a dick, but every once in a while you'll see a female herm as well. And they're usually dedicated to Hermes, sometimes to Dionysus. And I love that they sort of reduce a man to his essential parts. And they were for good luck. So they would be placed in fields and also at crossroads to protect travelers. Sorry, I keep clicking backwards. So we created these herms that, I guess I feminized them in some ways. And this was while Trump was running, was like gearing up to run for president, and there was all of this like spiraling gender malaise happening. I mean, I guess there always is, but it was getting loud. So this one is kind of female. Her genital is a used coffee cup, and the wax that's like covering her, the candles on top were lit. Let's see, there's an installation view, so you can see like this one's dick is made of soap, and then water was pouring down, kind of melting it down. And that one's kind of more female. She has 2 holes. This has sort of wet concrete, where this book that I wrote was like buried into the book. And this one has like a line of candles that was like embedded into it that then burned down. So all of them have decay built in, flame, water, soap, solvents, concrete, and buried poetry. And the gallery was filled with music. It was viola da gamba. There's this Spanish Baroque conductor named Jordi Savall, who I'm really into. He's like this super charismatic, weird guy who like single-handedly revived Baroque music. And he like wears a big cape, and he's very, I don't know, I like him. Anyway, I think the viola da gamba sounds like a sad father, and so I wanted that sound to be vibrating through the space. And anyway, so that was that project. And what I liked about it is like, I like the fact that my friend Oscar's work is so butch. It's almost a joke, the level of masculinity in it, and there was something about taking these totems of public sexuality, which those ancient herms were. It made me think about how sex and sexuality are still, in many ways, I feel, kind of, it's not exactly state-controlled. It's not like the government is building these pillars with dicks. You know, so it's not as, maybe we could say repressive as it was in the ancient world. But there's still this, there's something about the quasi-invisibility of like porn culture and the way that you can't see it, but it's like everywhere. Like like in the air between us right now, like on a nano level, there's like so much fucking. You know what I mean? And that is the engine of a huge amount of money and a huge amount of energy that propels the internet. But it's not visible, but it's still between us. And it's somehow between us in our relationships, I feel. And I wanted somehow to like monumentalize that or literalize it in a way. The other weird thing was that like I had this job where like my boss was like a sexual harasser and like a creep at the time. And that experience was really weird because it was like a new job and it like opened up all this old trauma that I had thought I had gotten over. You with me? So there was something about those sculptures too that made me think about, I guess it taught me the value of monuments, especially funerary monuments. Like headstones, but also monuments to various kinds of genocide and war and catastrophe. It taught me what physical objects, things with weight and mass, can do for grief. Because I'd always worked with language, and my previous performances had all used my body. I didn't show you the other ones, but the one with the spider is like a good example. I'm very willing to do whatever with my own body, but I hadn't thought about making a heavy object into which it is possible to bury pain and suffering. And what was interesting about this is that it did liberate me from a lot of the suffering that I'd been carrying in my body. And I found that living a year with crazy PTSD, just insane levels of physical symptoms connected to experiences that I had had of violence and of rape that I had thought were no longer in me. The experience of living that way made my body feel like a mummy or a statue. And so having created these objects with a friend of mine and put them in this kind of neutral space actually took a lot of that shit out of my body, and that was something I didn't know sculpture could do. So I can't speak about what its value is to art history or, you know what I mean, to contemporary practice. Like I'm not trained as an artist, but it was fascinating for me to like have a physical experience of the value of monuments when I've tended to be someone who maybe ideologically was sort of against them. I sort of don't trust the state. I don't trust what some politicians think I should remember or what they want to act like they remember. You know what I mean? I've tended to sort of be suspicious of monuments for that reason, because you say, oh, we remember the Holocaust or we remember the disappeared, but does the government really want to remember any of it, or they just want to act like they do? I don't know. But it's valuable somehow. There is some kind of weird aura in these things that holds pain, that takes it out of the body and allows it some space. So that was helpful for me. Anyway, I'm going to tell you about two more performances, and I'll try to speed it up a little. The next two were physical, and they were based on the idea of symmetry and fraternity. And I really like this tarot card because the two siblings are not alike. One is mutant and has a tail. and is sort of having a hard time, and the other one is sort of smiling and having a little bit of a better time, and he's standing on dry ground and he's sort of studying the sibling. And so I love this kind of symmetrical asymmetry. And so coming out of that, I started working with this actor who has the same birthday as me. And that's him, Jim Fletcher. We're both born on October 24th, not in the same year. We obviously have a different body type, but I like the idea that we could be equal, or the fantasy that we were twins. I just thought I'd play on this idea of equality and fairness. And so I wanted to create this performance based on the idea of a fair fight. The idea of a fair fight. I just like that idea. I don't know if it's possible, but I like the idea of a fair fight. And Mortal Kombat is a video game that really, really, really like blew my mind when I was a teenager, because my brother started playing it around the time that I started menstruating. Does anybody play Mortal Kombat growing up? Yeah.
No.
No?
No, I didn't.
You didn't?
No.
Oh, yes, you have a comment. Do you want to say something? No. Okay. I don't understand what you said. But love it. Yeah. Well, what I remember about it was the splashing blood, and it just blew my mind. Like I couldn't get over it, and the finishing moves, the super violent finishing moves. It was just I hadn't seen anything like it. It was amazing, and I just like the violence of it for me at that stage was like I was just like whoa, like wow. And because it happened around the time of my first menstruation, I've always had this idea in the back of my head that like war is menstruation envy. So basically, Jim and I created this performance that was a game. It was structured like a game, and it had rounds. And in each round, there would be different things at play. So sometimes we would use facial expressions against each other. Sometimes we used words against each other, and sometimes we were physically violent with each other. And all the violence was real, and we practiced it. And so we did several versions of the performance, but this one took place at the Whitney in the old building, in the Brewer building in New York. It was actually the last performance to take place in that building before they moved. And we did it at midnight, and this is like the lead up to it. And we, in the different rounds, sometimes we were punching each other in the stomach. Sometimes we were slapping each other in the face, and in another round, he was sort of moving me around like a piece of luggage. And then as the rounds progressed, the sort of momentum was allowed to increase. But in the rehearsal, a lot of what we did was resist momentum. We sort of had this word that we called fenestration. Fenestration. It's like, we made up the word, but it's like the idea of putting a window between things. So we were trying to resist momentum in order to kind of deconstruct the physical grammar of violence. Does that make sense? I know it's dark in there. Maybe could we bring up the house lights a little bit? I just feel like, I feel bad that like I'm talking at you and you're in the dark. Are you good? Okay. Okay, but by the later rounds, we had more momentum building, and again, we're like playing on the idea of symmetry and asymmetry, fraternity and enmity. At the end, I don't have a slide of it here, but I had my period, and I wanted there to be blood, so at the end I took out my tampon. Because I felt like there was this sense, I felt that there was some disappointment in the audience that we didn't die. Like people had a great reaction to this performance, as far as I know. I mean, it's like performances in theater, it's like people don't have to like it, but it's like, you know, but people had a strong reaction to it, but I had this weird feeling that people were irritated with me that I wasn't dead when it was over, or that I wasn't covered in blood. But because all the violence was real, I wasn't going to use fake blood. So the only real blood was in my tampon. And at the end, Jim died, and I ran off stage. And during the rehearsal for this piece, just crazy things started happening to me. I guess physically and mentally. Does anybody here practice martial arts? No. So I had no experience with martial arts either. I had done ballet. And when you start exploring and training to fight, and to both receive blows and to deal blows, you start thinking about the space around your body and about energy in a really, really different way. And because in our rehearsals, we were literally slapping each other and punching each other and practicing what that felt like, and we were very, very careful. We wanted it to be real, so we sort of would start gently and kind of escalate. When you get slapped in the face, there's visceral reaction. Has anybody ever been slapped in the face?
Sure.
Yeah. Of course. Have you ever slapped someone? Yeah. It's a visceral reaction, and so practicing that and getting punched in the stomach is also very visceral. It's a very lazy metaphor you'll read a lot in alt-lit. In alt-lit, if somebody has a bad experience, they'll say it was like being slowly punched in the stomach. It's like in every single, they always say that. And I'm like, really? Was it really like that? You know? Anyway, while we were rehearsing, when I would leave the rehearsal, my body was just in this crazy state because all of these different endorphins and hormones, whatever, that secrete when you're in that situation, were secreting while my critical faculty and my whatever normal brain was also functioning, because we're structuring the creation of this art piece. So one day, when I left rehearsal, this weird thing happened to me, and this is the last part of the talk, and I just wanted to show you where it happened. So we had been rehearsing, and I was on the Lower East Side, and it was 4:30 in the afternoon, around this time of year, 4 years ago now. And I was crossing the street, just where those people are crossing the street, to that traffic island. And the sun came out from behind some clouds. And I looked at it, and it filled me with unusual warmth. And it was so beautiful. You know how the sun comes from behind a cloud and you can feel it suddenly. But this was like that, but then it was more than that. And I sat down on that bench where you can see a junkie there is unpacking his suitcase. I sat down on that bench, and the sun was pouring into me through what I call my antenna. It's this point on my head where I bumped my head once in a car accident, and all my first white hairs came from this spot. So the sunbeam was pouring in. I don't know how we're doing on time, but this is the last part. And I just want to set this up so you understand what was happening. So this warmth starts pouring in through the sunbeam into my hole, into my antenna. And I was filled with rapture. The storm. Now we all have to live here for the next 24 hours. I was filled with this feeling of unbelievable, insane amount of bliss like I've never felt in my life. And a total pervasive love, an indescribable amount of love. And and then the sun started to talk to me. And the way that it was talking wasn't audible, it wasn't like sound. It was like these thought forms were entering my brain and body in 3 dimensions. So that they entered me totally, like they were fully formed. And the language that was a part of them was like one edge. So like, I'm holding this clicker and it has like at least 3 dimensions that we can see. And like the language was just like one corner of the total shape of the thought. And I could physically feel the sun through the physical beam of the warmth and the golden love pervading me. I could feel it reorganizing my cells and using my brain to like, and all of my previous experiences to like restructure things into these thought forms. Does that make sense? Okay, I mean, I'm just trying to explain this weird experience. And then I like realized that I had my notebook with me, and I also realized that at that moment I actually had a beard. I had a beard that was made of acne. Maybe some of you have had an acne beard. Maybe not. It's not easy to grow an acne beard. You have to be really stressed out. And it's not a pleasant thing to have. I mean, I don't recommend it, but I just happened to have at that time a beard made of acne. And it was a combination of things. While I was rehearsing that performance, it was when I had that creep at my job, so the trauma that I was speaking about in the previous piece was really flowing through me at that time. And when I was like sitting down and the sunbeam was like pouring into me and the thought forms were happening, and I realized I had my notebook, I also realized simultaneously that I had a beard, just like Moses. And that's why the joke title for this became Mosaic. Okay? I had a beard, I took notes. I guess you have to have a beard, maybe, in order for these kinds of encounters to happen. So what I'd like to do now is share with you the transcript of that encounter, okay? So I'm just going to click through it and read it, and my wonderful interpreter, Barbara, will be giving you the version in Spanish, but you'll be able to hear it and see it, and then it'll be over and we can just talk, if you want to. Okay, I'm probably going to click the wrong way because I always do. Okay. Reality is perceptible. Situations are cells. People don't know how to use their talents. Analogy is the structuring principle of the universe. The suffering of woman is the story of the universe. We have to understand ourselves at all costs. Nature extends from us. Nature mirrors us. Water, mirror, window. Each people has the gift of its catastrophe. Learn how to use this gift or meet your peril. Earth is special. People from all over the universe will come here. There is no back to get to. God didn't die. He's just not the only God in the universe. The moon is superior to the sun insofar as she has had the night to know he is not the only God in the universe. Difference is meant to be comedy. Difference is a toy. Nazism was an invitation to the world to reckon with the nature of evil. Each thing teaches. When faced with evil, learn its secret. What urgent disease, deficiency within my own soul does this wretched symptom signify? We do need every kind of story because there is every kind of person, yet still great art is crucial for the world to watch when it watches divinity and splendor, rather than what we're watching now while learning to watch. The world always sustains the maximum suffering it can bear according to the nature of its age. There will always be the maximum possible destruction in a given time. This is why the other world has always needed to be created. Mercury also teaches, I want to be like, and the risks that go with, I want to be like, to teach us about the principle of likeness that governs the universe. Our solar system equals analogous to the universe. That the world has always sustained and will always sustain the maximum destruction possible is why the other world has always been and will always need to be created. Everyone has a star. This is why we practice dialogue. We're learning. Our solar system is the analog of the universe. The deeper into the cell we get, the more kinds of people we produce. The more we learn about the cell, the more we have to know about the people. Oop, that's a repeat. Mercury favors women and children who long to become, who learn by imitation, who listen. It is true that the older a thing is, the better it is, except with food and food-like principles, not the sock on your foot, but any speck of matter in relation to the dignity of age that is the winery. The reason great art matters is see as I see. I gave you no man for a father, no man could stand between me and you. Medicine is divine, not as it is shown, but as it should be. Divine science, divine scientist, medicine would be divine. Whatever you have been watching should have taught you by now. The time of spectacle will pass. Technology is for communication. Technology evolved solely for the purpose of divine communication. All its other forms are byproducts. There is nothing a person cannot love. Everything has a nature. Find out yours. And that's it. at once. So it wasn't a normal form of comprehension. It was like reorganizing me such that I could understand what was being said. Some of the things at the time irritated me. You know what I'm saying? And some of the things now, only with time and with some distance, have begun to make some kind of sense. So I just want to offer that. But we can talk about anything you want. Yeah.
Bueno, yo voy a preguntar en castellano sobre la pregunta en relaciones. No, en relación a esta última parte del que el sol te dictó, si pensás que en un punto, si no es toda la poesía algo así como una especie de mensaje que viene de otra parte, que no es el autor, bueno, quería saber qué pensabas de eso.
I love that question because I thought about that a lot, because I do feel that poetry comes from elsewhere, but I was really careful with this particular thing to say that it's not a poem that I composed at first. When I was first talking about it, I wanted to be really clear with people that I didn't write this. And it's not a work of art. It's separate from a work of art. It's the transcription of an encounter. But after living with it, you know, for 3 years I didn't even look at the notebook that I wrote it all down in because I was busy. Like I was like busy with my life. And then when I opened it, I like cried for a week because I felt like I was like a shitty prophet. Because for so many reasons, and I felt like my whole body and my whole life was an obstruction to what had passed through me, and I felt like I was a bad vessel for it. And I remember when I first read the transcription, for example, to just give you one example, when I first read it to my partner, they said that they felt that the voice of this text was a strong feminine voice. And I was like, but I heard a masculine, even though it wasn't audible, the entity communicating through me was masculine. And so I was like, and now I'm obscuring this voice with my dirty female body, and I went through this whole crisis where then I had to accept that it passed through me. And so gradually what has happened pertaining to this question is that I do think that there's some kind of continuum. I can't say that everything I write comes from the fucking sun. But in a sense, we can say that it's not untrue to say that everything we have and everything that we do comes from the sun. You have the sun on your flag here, you know, and we, so it's not, perhaps everything comes from there, I don't know. Maybe for some people it comes from Venus, or it comes from the moon, or like the planet Nibiru, or whatever. But I had to gradually adjust to the fact that whatever this is, because it used my body, because it passed through me, it mixed with me. And in some sense, even though most of my poetry doesn't come like that. Like, I've never had an experience like that since. I've had other really freaky experiences, but nothing quite like that. Tradition of it, where the poet seems obsessed by the sun, Apollinaire, Aimé Césaire, Mayakovsky, Frank O'Hara. You could even say Chaucer, because it begins with the April sun. There there's a long tradition of solarity, I guess, in poetry, but it's not the same to be inspired by it and to be talking to it as to sort of be penetrated. But we are penetrated by it all the time. We just can't necessarily hear it. So that's my non-answer. Yeah.
Realmente, ¿qué sentiste o cómo nos puedes describir qué sentiste ese momento en que tuviste la experiencia con tu jefe? Y tal vez qué sentiste en el momento que pudiste liberarte de eso. Y agrego algo más, si alguna vez lo sentiste desde una mujer, porque las mujeres a veces también somos agresivas entre unas y otras.
That's a great question. Thank you for that. The thing with the boss was really weird because I wasn't expecting it. You know, there's spaces that you are expecting abuse, like the street, or if you were working in a bar or a nightclub, you're sort of ready, you have your guard up, you're ready for it. And I very naively thought that at this fancy university where they had invited me to teach, based on my work, and because I'd always been treated with respect in academic space, I naively thought that I would be treated respectfully there. And it totally flipped me out, and I was like crying and shaking, and I stopped being able to sleep. I was really tormented because it was a very fancy job, and it represented a great opportunity for me in my career. Which if I had been able to take it, I've had a very weird trajectory. I make performances, I'm here talking to 30 people in the middle of a storm in Buenos Aires, like I'm not at some university having a kind of normal, good literary career, you know what I mean? And so it threw me into turmoil, both in terms of my sense of the social order, but also all of these physical experiences that I'd had as a younger woman with, just with being raped and with having experienced violence and also just experiencing an ambient amount of harassment that every woman knows just from walking down the street. Just all of that accumulated crap, suddenly that experience revealed that it had not left my body. And that was terrifying. And actually, I became furious with myself. And this is perverse, but some people in this room will understand. The person I was angriest at was myself, because I couldn't forgive myself for having been so naive that I didn't somehow protect myself or have more of a cynical sense that this could happen at my job, because of course it happens everywhere. And I was angry at myself also that I hadn't gotten over things that I had really pushed away in order to continue living a productive life. I was angry at myself that I hadn't freed myself from those old experiences. So I actually felt guilty for suffering. And so that was horrible. And I became frigid. I would cry when somebody was trying to be close to me, or when I wanted to be close to them and I couldn't allow it, I couldn't stand it. It was a very, very, very painful year, very painful year. And then the second part of your question was, have I ever experienced that with women? Or did I miss?
No, and actually, how do you feel when you feel better?
So when I felt better, it really, really was the first key that unlocked it. I did sue the university, and I won a settlement, and pursuing, this was 3 years before Me Too, but pursuing the facts and honoring my own dignity was productive, that was useful, but really, honestly, that sculpture project with my friend Oscar it released something from me. It's hard to explain, but I had been the statue, and then with those statues, and by making them funny and melancholy and allowing them to weep, but also be dignified, allowing them to be both masculine and feminine, to be both strong and rotting and decaying, it allowed something that was inside of me, maybe possessing me, to leave my body. And that experience, I can't explain it, but I just felt lighter afterward. And I felt like I had done something honest. And it was something this was a period, I should say too, that but maybe the worst thing of all about the experience of being mistreated by somebody in a professional environment where I was exercising my profession as a writer and an intellectual. I wasn't being a cocktail waitress or a whore or an art model, all of which are things that I did in my younger years. But I was exercising my creative and intellectual life. The experience of being disrespected in that arena made me doubt my abilities in language. And that was probably the worst. And so in making that project, and I wrote a whole book for it, but I buried it in the sculpture. And it didn't totally liberate me, but it opened the door, and it was something that wasn't in language. But it still felt honest. Does that make sense? And an honest gesture is so healing. And because it also had a pretense to being public, there's a way that it also frees you from the prison of what you think you're carrying all along. And the state does that all the time. Advertising does that all the time. They control public space, but we don't get to occupy public space with what we're forced to carry by moving through this culture. So it was like an inversion, and that was so liberating. And then finally, female aggression. Yes, it's a huge factor. It's a huge reality. I mean, I think that a major portion of what women are only just beginning to learn is how to support one another. I think men are very aggressive with each other as well. I think that sometimes feminism and women have had this fantasy, at least in the United States, that men are all really nice to each other, and that they just support each other's work, and that they make each other famous, and that they protect each other. I mean, and we do see this culturally. There's a kind of there's all these ideas of a kind of homosocial boys club where men kind of have each other's backs. But I think men are also very vicious with each other, and certainly as a function of the ways that we've been socialized, women can be viciously competitive and very difficult as opponents. One of the reasons why I liked playing out the idea of a fair fight with a man is that men are sometimes easier to fight with because they're simpler. I don't mean that men are like simple, but in some ways in conflict it's a little bit clearer, whereas conflict with women, because of the structure of our consciousnesses or our psyches, it's much more complicated and difficult to work out a fair fight with a woman. I find conflict with women terrifying. I bow down to them at all costs and at every opportunity because I fear their fury.
First of all, is it from an illumination? And is the male lion bleeding, or is the sun bleeding?
The sun is bleeding. So this is an alchemical allegory for vitriol. Vitriol is actually an acronym, a Latin acronym that means basically visit the interior of the earth, purify yourself there, and you will find the sacred stone, or the philosopher's stone. Vitriol is also what the alchemists called sulfuric acid. And what sulfuric acid does is it burns through everything that isn't gold. And so mercury plays a part in the creation of sulfuric acid. And so this image is an allegory for vitriol, or for sulfuric acid. And the green lion represents the sulfuric acid, and when it's biting the sun and causing it to bleed, it's burning through the merely apparent, visible reality to penetrate into the deeper truth of things. I think this is from the 17th century. I don't remember what text it's from, but it is an illumination, yeah.
¿Alguna otra pregunta, comentario? Sí.
No, volviendo a lo que preguntaba ella, vos comentaste que en un momento, al final de tu respuesta, mencionaste la pelea justa entre mujeres, que es más complicada. ¿Te hubieses imaginado tu performance de pelea justa con una mujer, por ejemplo?
Thank you, that's a great question. I think that would have to come next. I wouldn't redo the same performance just with a woman, but the idea of examining and deconstructing the grammar of aggression between women, it would operate under different parameters. Because with Jim, I was playing on the idea of fraternal twins because we had the same birthday, and because we're so physically unmatched, I just thought that perversity was attractive. The idea that anything could possibly be fair or balanced between us for any reason, whether of gender, of physicality, of intellect, of anything, because we're so completely different. So that's what I was playing with there. Fraternity, fraternal twins, or not identical symmetry. With another woman, it would be a completely different scenario, and I think you suggested a really valuable avenue, a really valuable idea, which would be to try to work that out. And my instinct as I'm thinking through it is I would actually prefer to do that in pure theatrical terms. I've written a play and I have worked in theater. I didn't include that in this performance, but my sense is with in order to sort of explore what a fight or a fair fight, a well-matched fight might be between women, my stomach says I would prefer to write it theatrically and have it involve a lot of language, which that performance did not. There was some language in it, but very little, just one round where we threw words at each other. Thank you.
A mí me pasó que una vez estaba a la noche caminando por mi barrio y yo sentí que la luna se abrió para mí, para que yo pueda decirle cualquier cosa, y me dio un poco de miedo y empecé a caminar y no le decía nada. Y lo primero, no sé, le agradecí por la posibilidad y le pedí algo demasiado personal y después no sé si me arrepentí y le pedí enamorarme y que sea recíproco y me pasó que al muy poco tiempo me pasó. Yo le vi la cara a la luna, pero no me habló, solamente me dejó que yo le hable y la relación fue muy intensa, pero también fue muy violenta y bueno, esa fue mi experiencia, te la quería contar. Tuve un poco de miedo y la última cuadra como que la hice corriendo y no sé, nunca se lo había contado a nadie. Fue algo así y no pude pensar sobre eso, no pensé nada, no volví a tener no tuve sensaciones en el cuerpo, miedo tuve, pero no sé bien qué es, no pude escribir sobre eso tampoco, es como que no le pude poner palabras a eso, es como dejé que suceda, pero bueno, todavía estoy pensando qué hubo ahí. Eso, gracias.
Gracias. Thank you for sharing that with me. I'm keeping the headphones on because I want to ask you a question. So, have you ever talked to the moon since then?
Sí.
Yeah. And have you heard from the moon since then?
No.
No. Okay, so I'll take these off and I'll respond. It's so beautiful of you to share that with us. I really thank you. These things do happen. And I think there's a fascinating lesson deep at the core of it, which is that the condition of our hearts and of our lives is in living relationship with our universe, you know? And it's in these particular extreme states sometimes that suddenly we're able to hear things not in a metaphorical way, but in a literal way. And that is exciting because I think, and it's a lesson that I have had to train myself to learn every day. Because when I walk down the street and the sun shines on me, it's not talking to me the way it did that day. But it is. And when the veils of ordinary reality, like what that image was an allegory for, that lion biting the sun, I'll fix that. When the veil opens, it's a gift. It's a gift. People do a lot of drugs and a lot of fucking yoga and join a lot of cults to try to have some encounter like that, you know? It's a great gift, and it's very, very normal and very natural that you felt frightened. If you look into the holy books, you know, when Muhammad first had his vision in the cave, he was freaked out. He was terrified. He was afraid that he was losing his mind, you know. When Moses heard the burning bush and God said, I'm going to talk through you and you're going to do all these miracles, he said, take my brother, you know. And it's very, very normal to be overwhelmed by this encounter. And one of the things that I want to do, I think, in giving this talk, and one of the reasons why I try to keep my warmth when I'm sharing this story, is to show that it doesn't have to be terrifying, but there are things inside of us that are terrifying. And sometimes finding oneself in a terrifying relationship, and one that involves violence, and this is maybe something for a longer talk or in a different space, but there are things that we're trying to work out ourselves, fears and terrors that are reflected in the other, and sometimes we want or need an experience of our worst nightmare. That's part of the allure and the danger that draws us into experience. And I guess the main thing that there's more that we could say, because the experiences like this are a school. That encounter, even though it happened just one night, it's a school for your entire life. And the main thing that I think one of the gifts that it offers is that it's a test in a way, that when you feel yourself falling back into the ordinary manifest world, the world of what you can see, the world of surfaces, and the prison of your conditioning and your loneliness and your sense of being misunderstood or hurt. There's this, because you've been given that amazing gift of that encounter, you have the chance now to develop and build your relationship back. It's like the ladder came down to you, and now you have the opportunity to create an architecture in your consciousness that allows you this connection and allows it to begin to sustain you, because it's a beneficial, benefic force. The moon represents our needs, our longing. Of course, poets are always writing to the moon. There's much more poetry for the moon than the sun. I listed a few poets who love the sun. Often, the sun poets tend to be kind of fascist assholes, so I try to keep a little ironic distance with that. But the moon is the goddess of poetry and the goddess of love, and you are not the only one on this planet who has found herself addressed by the moon, and you have the right to address her. And there's a beautiful tradition of exquisite prayer and verse that devotes itself to the moon. And today is actually the new moon, so it's your day. And there's all kinds of ways that you can gently build a relationship with it. That I know you said that the relationship that you asked for was very much left a lot to be desired. It was not ultimately a good relationship for you. Do I understand that correctly? It was painful, yeah. But inevitably there must have been, you have to find, it's like you're a gold digger. You have to find what was in that you keep, and everything else you throw away. But if there's 2 specks of gold in that encounter, that's what you carry, and you can develop this relationship, and it can sustain you. That's the other world that the sun, I think, was talking about. You can build it.